I definitely think there's about 1 billion Beauty and the Beast retellings. Like, a lot of people would say it's probably overdone, but if there is anything I'm guaranteed to buy, it's a Beauty and the Beast retelling. So sorry, everybody, if you see an announcement for one and you're like, oh my God, what idiot keeps buying these? The answer is me.
You know what you should read.
It's time for What You Should Read, the podcast all about the titles you need. Join 3 book lovers and a guest as they cover all the best new titles to enjoy with your tea.
I have that, but I haven't read it yet.
Hi, I'm Julia.
I'm Rachael.
And I'm Kelly.
And once upon a time, this was What You Should Read.
The podcast whence we should all over our books.
And in case you can't tell, today, thus be our retellings episode. Kelly's like, what are you doing?
I can't keep this going. I'm sorry. This joke will not live happily ever after. I'm killing it now. Sorry.
And scene. No, but I've been waiting for a long time for this episode. I'm so excited. We're going to be talking about our favorite retellings, why we love them. They're definitely in my wheelhouse. So I guess we can say this is the first Julia Wheelhouse episode.
Yay!
Which we've been planning to do, Wheelhouse episodes, spoiler alert. But and we have the best guest today. We have Kay Ancrum, author of The Wicker King and Weight of the Stars, and her forthcoming Peter Pan retelling, Darling, which we're all super excited about. And she's going to be joining us for the second half. So can't wait. But first, Rachael, what are you reading?
So it's been only a couple of days since we last recorded. So I am still reading The Snow Child by Eowyn Ivey. It is a retelling, but it's not one of my recommendations for this episode because I have like 4 others and I haven't finished it yet. I'm about at part 3 and I'm still really loving it. And I also, my audiobook right now is People Like Her by Ellery Lloyd, which is a thriller and already gave me nightmares last night. So, and I'm only like 40 pages into it.
Oh no.
It's really creepy for sure. But like in that way, that's very subtle. Like it's just normal things happening, but the anxiety that the writing style is inducing, it's sort of like when I read Scythe by Neil Shusterman. And that's not a scary book either, but I had nightmares.
Yeah.
Like so many nights. I would wake up screaming nightmares.
I could see how that book would give you a nightmare. I love Scythe. And I also loved Thunderhead. I did not love the third book, or I couldn't even get very far into it, The Toll.
Yeah, I've heard that one. I heard a lot of people were disappointed with that third one.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Cool. Kelly, what are you reading?
Well, on Sunday, I was reading Girls with Sharp Sticks, and I'm now reading the sequel, Girls with Razor Hearts.
Ooh.
And the third one, Girls with Rebel Souls, dropped today, March 23rd, when we're taping. And I am so excited to finish this book, which I just started, and read that one. I am loving this dystopian series.
Nice.
Cool. Well, I wouldn't say I'm in a slump because I want to be reading more. I'm still reading Stepsisters because yes, we're only a couple days out from recording last time I talked about it. I'm still really enjoying it. But I haven't picked up anything new. I was texting you both earlier today. I'm kind of all over the place today. So hopefully I'll get back into my rhythm soon.
Yeah.
That was like me last week. Every day was hard to pick up a book.
Sometimes you just need to binge Married at First Sight season after season instead of reading your books.
It's true.
It is true. I am a little worried because this is the second episode in a row you've mentioned it.
Kelly, I will mention it until you start watching it. That's how this is gonna go.
I mean, that's totally fine, but you know how long it took me to start watching The Bachelor, so you will be talking about it for a long time, which is fine. I love every conversation we have, but I'm a little concerned is all.
Do you want to start with the season that's a hot mess, or do you want to start with the season that will make you believe in love?
I don't believe in love, and I don't think anything can help me.
Okay, so we'll start
that went dark.
So you can start with season 10.
Season 10. All right, I will make note of it.
Perfect.
So in a departure, sort of, we have a little bit of book news today. You may remember that we loved The Babysitter's Club on Netflix. And they are filming now, I believe, but they have a recasting because the original Dawn Schaefer, Xochitl Gomez, got a part in the new Doctor Strange movie, which is awesome, except that means that she can't really be Dawn Schaefer either.
Aw.
I know. But they found a new actress, Kendra Sanchez. They have the absolute cutest video welcoming her. I guess nobody told her. I mean, she knew she was in contention, I guess. But she's on a Zoom call with the actresses who play the other babysitters, and they say, like, do you want to join the club? And she starts screaming. It's fantastic.
Cute.
Yeah, so
I love all of the actresses in that show, and Xochitl was great, but good for her for getting that part in that big movie. Yeah. So obviously we'll miss her, but I'm excited for a new sitter. Yes, Rachael. Oh, Rachael is sitting in front of a Marvel poster, so you planned that.
I will say, speaking of things we're doing instead of reading, I've been watching the second series of Are You Afraid of the Dark, which is on Nickelodeon. And the second season, which just ended, actually has Malia Baker, who plays Mary Ann. And it also has the actress who played Lane. Lane from New York.
Yeah, I know who Lane is.
Yeah. Well, no, the Lane was from the show, which I just rewatched. But it's really good. And I hope maybe when they move forward, possibly some more babysitters can show up, but they're also in very real danger on that show. So
I really need to know if my theory that the girl we see at the end of the last episode is Shannon.
I know.
I would also be curious. So hopefully, they don't have a release date for season 2, but hopefully not too much longer.
Yeah. Yay. Cool.
Great. All right, so we're going to do a quick recent acquisitions where we talk about the books we've bought, borrowed, or been given. Kelly, what have you recently acquired?
Well, as always, I've always got something. So I got Girls with Rebel Souls by Suzanne Young, which is the third book in the series. And I actually also got Through the Neverwoods, I think it's called, by Aiden Thomas, who wrote Cemetery Boys, which I loved. But this is another Peter Pan retelling, like Darling by Kay Ancrum, but actually out today.
What's it called?
I believe Through the Neverwoods.
Oh, great.
I will just double check super fast, but I think that's...
I've been seeing him post on Twitter about it.
Yeah, and I think actually they might be doing an event with Kay Ancrum talking about Peter Pan retellings. But
I would like to watch that. We'll have to ask her about it.
Yeah, I will find out if that's true and also put that in the show notes. Yep, Lost in the Neverwoods. I'm sorry.
Nice. That sounds great.
Yes.
It's the year of Peter Pan retellings. I love it.
Yay. Yes. Well, I have one recent acquisition. On Sunday afternoon, I went to the Target to do some grocery shopping, and I just meandered through the book aisle, as one does every time they go into Target, right?
Of course.
And I found Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler. It was 20% off. So I picked it up.
Love the cover.
Yes. And like, I love a nice paperback. I just love reading paperbacks.
Yeah.
Yes. And it looks like maybe N.K. Jemisin did the introduction or like
a forward. Yeah. Yeah. She did a forward.
Oh, that's great.
I'm so excited, especially after watching that interview with Octavia Butler from 2005, was it?
I think so.
Where she was talking about like fascism and stuff. And I'm just like, if only we could have thoughts.
The interview where she predicted all of this.
Yes. R.I.P. Octavia Butler. So anyway, that's mine.
Great. Well, I don't have any recent acquisitions, so
you're very responsible.
Yeah. I'm very tired and discombobulated this week, but it will get better. Yeah. yes, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we are going to be joined by Kay Ancrum, one of our faves, and we will be discussing retellings and what we love about them and the ones that we highly recommend. So stick around and we'll be right back.
You know what you should read.
It's time for what you should read.
Okay, we are
The
back
podcast.
and we are joined once again by the lovely Kay Ancrum. Hi, Kay. Thanks for joining us again.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so good to have you back. We're really excited to have you on this episode in particular, since we're talking about retellings. So I thought it would be fun to just start with a discussion, because I love retellings and I know that there are so many out there, and I'm just wondering what it is about retellings of fairy tales and classic tales and mythology that intrigues us, and why we're so drawn to them, and why there are so many of them. So, Kay, I'll throw it to you first. What do you think?
I feel like when it comes to kind of older stories, we have the same relationship with them as a lot of us have with fan fiction. They're basic enough for us to kind of like internalize the general plot and the general meanings behind them. And because they're so basic, we have the ability to kind of like let our imaginations go wild on how we would change or add things or interpret things, or, you know, even if the settings might be different. It's very much a medium where stories that are structured in a certain way kind of more often lend themselves to retellings.
Definitely. I also think that they're so comforting in a way, because they are familiar to us, but also in a way I find that newer reinterpretations often work to change things in a way that reflects how things have changed in society. And, I was thinking about a retelling that I think the book that got me into retellings was a book by an author that now I find very problematic. He is very problematic. And when I think back on the book, there are some problematic things to it when I look back on it. But now, I find that there are, retellings that are published more recently are righting certain wrongs, or, just telling things in a way that I think just reflect how society is changing and growing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Same. I had that same kind of thought when I thought about a lot of modern retellings and how they, like you said, right a lot of wrongs, or, bring more representation or inclusivity into the story.
Yeah. Are there any tales that get retold that when we see, oh, there's a new retelling of this story, we're immediately drawn to it? And then also, as a follow-up, are there any that we think are underrepresented in retellings and that we would like to see more of?
I definitely think there's about 1 billion Beauty and the Beast retellings. Like, a lot of people would say it's probably overdone, but if there is anything I'm guaranteed to buy, it's a Beauty and the Beast retelling. So sorry, everybody, if you see an announcement for one and you're like, oh my God, what idiot keeps buying these? The answer is me.
What is it about that story, Kelly, that draws you in so much, do you think?
I mean, introverts who like books, I don't know. It's a real mystery.
Yeah.
Something about someone choosing to be locked up in a castle with a giant library and not being allowed to leave.
That would be terrible.
What about you, Kay?
I tend to gravitate towards like Greek and Roman adaptions a lot. I actually, when I was in elementary school, I went to, and this is like such a weird Caliph factoid, I went to a very small Jewish school, even though I wasn't Jewish. Like, you could test in, and I tested in because that's the best school that my mom could
awesome.
in our area. And for whatever reason, they didn't teach us Spanish, German, any of that. They taught us Latin. They were like a bunch of little children all speaking Latin, and they taught us like Greek and Roman history. So I have like kind of like a personal, tie to those stories and those worlds. And I'm very, very invested in the concept of fallible gods and like human, like gods that make mistakes and are petty and, you know, just kind of do stuff. And I'm like, oh, that was an accident. Like, the concept of that is so lovely to me. So I really, really like those. And in particular, I'm very about the whole like Persephone Hades thing. Like that's my jam. And also like Medusa and Hercules stuff is really interesting. Hercules was pretty cool. So.
Yeah. Have you seen Hades Town?
I have not. With Hades Town, I'm doing that thing where like I know that I'm gonna love it too much. I'm gonna be obsessed with it. So I'm like staying away for my own well. Like, I don't want to hyper focus as bad as I know that I will.
If you ever get like a random month where you have nothing to do, then you could listen to the soundtrack and just be obsessed for 30 days.
Yeah. I had to do that. I did that for The Witcher. I like cleared my everything and like, dedicated so much time to caring about it. But anyway, that's my jam.
Yeah. I'm really drawn to the Cinderella retellings. It's a classic, and I just feel like there are so many different ways to interpret it. And there's something I'm going to talk about later, but I love the ones in particular that tells us what happened either before the story or after the story. Yeah. Rachel, what about you?
I guess there's not really one story that always will grab my attention, but for some reason I kind of like reading retellings of things where I've never read the source material. I don't know why, but I think it's like, well, let me read the retelling and then maybe I'll pick up the source material if I like it.
That's funny. I'm trying to think if there are any stories that I would like to see a new retelling of. I can't really think of one. Maybe Little Mermaid. I know there have been some, but the ones that I've read, I haven't really loved. And I love the story, so I would love to see something. Yeah.
I wonder what you all think of like retelling something that has such a cult following, like Lord of the Rings or something. How would that even be done? I don't know. I just had this thought and I was like, I don't know. That might be blasphemy, maybe.
I think it would be really interesting. I think for Lord of the Rings, since the Lord of the Rings fandom has so much like richness to it and so much like kind of cultural versatility. They're one of the friendlier fandoms in comparison to like Star Wars. I think that somebody would probably do like a really good like Baz Luhrmann, you know, Shakespearean modern where it's like kitschy kind of redo of Lord of the Rings. That would be really cool to see.
That would be cool.
It would be, yeah.
We kind of started touching on this, but like where do you think the difference is between retellings and fan fiction? Like where is the line? And I think that would be really interesting, especially with something like Lord of the Rings or Star Wars or anything that we generally don't see, probably because the actual fans would kill you, I bet, actually, if you tried.
That's true. Okay, so for fan fiction, like it's very much like an academic interest of mine. I have spent a lot of time kind of learning about how fan fiction is structured, why we do it, the history of it, you know, our relationship to fan works, who is predominantly writing fan fiction. Fan fiction kind of comes in two general categories. And it is fan fiction that is filling in like kind of more domestic environment that was missing from the original property. Then for the other half, it is filling in world building that is missing from the actual property. And the best examples I can use for that are Star Wars and Star Trek. Star Trek has extraordinarily rich world building, incredibly detailed world building, and all of the fan fiction is just like, who's in love with who? They're on a domestic space trip, they're on vacation, like, you know, all of that. And Star Wars has a very rich aesthetic, but incredibly underdeveloped world building. They'll give you like a little hint of something. Like, for example, the Knights of Ren in the new movies. They're just kind of like, there's these cool guys and they've got awesome costumes. We're not going to tell you anything about them. And you're like, wait, no, stop, come back. But like, they'll give you, you know, rich emotional drama and like, you know, familial bonds and Hamlet vibes and like all of that. So all of the Star Trek fan fiction and the like, you know, unapproved novels are just like incredibly detailed, gorgeous world building. And it kind of splits to that. And you can do that for any fandom. Hannibal, Sherlock, just literally all of them. Whatever one it lacks, people will pull in the other one for fiction that is created for it. Whereas like retellings of fairy tales, I believe, specific for fairy tales and general historical folk tales, they exist as a cultural marker to express basal values within the original culture. So for example, one of the things I'm like really passionate about as an academic is like the history of Americans' tall tales and how they were kind of created by our poor people, our poor white culture that is underdiscussed and underappreciated by the like white gentry, and about how all of those like, tall tales and stories and stuff like that like are so incredibly representative of like American American like strength of spirit, the way that we handle like manifest destiny, the way that we handle individualism, like they're all examples of that. And when you look at like global fairy tales, and you look at Russian fairy tales, you're looking at, you know, Cameroonian fairy tales, you're looking at French fairy tales, at the very root of all of them are these features that have expanded into kind of like larger cultural dogma of the storytelling history and culture of that nation, you know, even up to today, and how they handle like sitcoms and how they handle, you know, like romance novels and stuff. And because fan fiction exists for one purpose and fairy tales exist for another like cultural purpose, the way that we handle retelling of them is very, very crisply separate. So when you're doing fairy tale retellings, you are hinging on to deeper cultural moments within the narrative of that. The Cinderella story, the structure of, you know, the abandoned, you know, girl who overcomes via the power and strength of kindness and what it means to be kind and strong. And then, you know, with fan fiction, even for something as old as like, you know, Arthurian fan fiction, you're talking about the like kind of overarching, like, oh, we know what's going on with the technical issues, let's talk about the romance, or oh, we know what's going on with the romance, let's talk about the technical issues, which was very Once and Future King. And that's kind of like the major difference. So if I was to write, you know, a Cinderella retelling, I would be like, what is the essence of what it means to be Cinderella? Whereas if I wrote, you know, a Sherlock Holmes fan fiction, I would be like, in what ways can I recreate London, but in, you know, wherever I wanted it to be? And
oh, can you please do that? That would be great.
It's so overdone. I can't do it right now. I have to wait another 10 years. But yes, that's how I feel about that.
Really interesting. Yeah.
I love that idea of the difference being the either building out the world or just playing around in a really well developed world, like a playground almost. Yeah,
for sure. So speaking of retellings, you have a new book coming out this year that is a Peter Pan retelling called Darling. Tell us a little more about that.
God, today is Aiden's Lost in Neverwoods release date. So his Peter Pan book is coming out. So I love Aiden Thomas. I actually blurb Cemetery Boys, so I'm like full like headspace thinking about his Peter Pan thing. But my Peter Pan thing is coming out on June 22nd, I believe. And it is a adaptation as opposed to a retelling. It is the exact story, Peter and Wendy, the 1904 version. I lifted everything out of there, turned, and then plopped it right down in like a specifically modern setting, because the purpose of this for me was to create everything exactly as it was, to showcase an aspect of the story that is kind of underdiscussed outside of academia, which is that Peter Pan is a serial killer. He's a serial killer in the original book, and he's a serial killer in my book. They talk about it relatively briefly, but they do mention it 3 times in the book in the very beginning, when they're like, you know, Peter Pan, you grow up to be a certain age and then you just disappear. And then there's another part where they're like, sometimes Peter, who has memory issues, wanders off into the woods, and then he doesn't come back for a while, and then he does come back and he's having memory issues, and then we have to go go and find a bunch. And then there's like another part where they're like, Peter Pan, all of the pirates who he has killed, and some of them whose faces he remembers. Like, he's literally just out here killing children, and nobody lives forever in Neverland except for him. And like, the book was designed by the original author to be a book that is, and there's only, I think, one book that I know of that's modern that does this. It's meant to be read differently by children and differently by adults. And the book is Coraline. When children read Peter Pan, they read basically what happened in the Disney movie. Like, it's pretty cut and dry, they're having their adventure and whatever. When parents read it, because we have the ability to kind of like see kind of like between the lines and catch certain lines that might be throwaway lines for kids, we can see how dangerous of a situation that it was, and that the author talks about the children being uncomfortable around Peter. And like, there's a scene where they're with the indigenous population that's there, and all the kids see him doing something racist in the 1904 version, which is very racist by itself. And they're all looking at each other like, this is very uncomfortable. And one of them, like, Wendy's like, I'm going to say something about it. And the other kids are like, please do not. Like, don't say anything. Like, it's too dangerous. And so the effect is that Peter Pan being read by a parent to a child is two people experiencing two entirely different books. So as a adaptation, I wanted to keep everything. So for Captain Hook, it is Detective Inspector Hook. All of the Lost Boys are homeless and or foster children. The mermaids are drag queens. There is a Neverbird who is like a burlesque drag queen. The cops are referred to as kind of like pirates colloquially by Peter. And like, the actual pacing of the story is the same. The only thing that is different is the ending of the book, because I felt it is important for Peter's victims to have justice.
Yeah.
So that's what Darling is about.
Wow.
Can't
I'm so
wait.
excited.
I don't think I can wait 3 more months.
Oh. Man, I'll kick you an arc when this is all over.
Love it. That was our agenda. Well, I would love to get some recommendations for retellings. And we just mentioned Aiden Thomas's Peter Pan retelling is releasing today. So there are so many great retellings and adaptations out there. So Kayla, do you want to start us off with your first recommendation? We'll do like a round robin style, go one at a time.
Yeah, sure. My favorite fairy tale adaptation is a book called Spindle's End by Robin McKinley. And it is a Sleeping Beauty retelling where they try slightly harder than all of the other retellings to keep her from, pricking her finger. And they have this really funny part in the beginning where all the fairies are like, oh, we're gonna give her beautiful blue eyes and gorgeous, blonde hair and cheeks like, with the blush of sunrise, but they forget to ask her to be beautiful. So she looks terrible, but she like has all of those features.
Oh, I love this.
And they're like, no, let's just send her to live with someone else. And it just kind of goes just crazily from there. They have this extracurricular girl where they're like, okay, you look hot enough to pass for the princess, and the real princess is off in the woods getting really ripped. And it's just a really, really funny and interesting book, and it's just one of the most beautiful love stories where she falls in love with the commoner because she's hanging out with the commoners that I've ever read.
I love that so much.
That sounds great.
I love the idea of like, oh, we forgot to say beautiful. We just thought if we gave her blonde hair and blue eyes that naturally she'd be beautiful. And it's like, no, let's turn that on its head. That's great. Rachel, what about you?
So my first recommendation is this little book of poems and short stories called Fierce Fairy Tales, Poems and Stories to Stir Your Soul by Nikita Gill. And it has a lot of really good, just like very short little stories or poems. Like there's one called Why Tinkerbell Left Anger Management. And Why Tinkerbell Quit Anger Management, sorry. And it just has a lot of really good lines in it. It's just a lot of like feminist or like retellings of a lot of these fairy tales in the form of poetry or just little vignettes. but it goes through, like, for Cinderella, it talks about like the stepsisters and how abused children grow up to be bullies, stuff like that. It's really interesting. I very much enjoyed it, and it's short, so you can read it very quickly too.
That sounds so great.
Mm-hmm.
Kelly, what about you?
Okay, so my first is Tiger Lily by Jodi Lynn Anderson, which I know because our friend Kathy, who has come on the podcast a couple times, it is one of her favorite books. And I'm like 98% sure she started our online book club so she could make all of her friends read this book. And I mean, I'm dead serious. I'm pretty sure I'm right. I'll be talking to her soon, so I'll let you know, but I'm right. And it's basically Peter Pan, like the whole story, but as told by Tiger Lily. And it's good and sad, and yeah, Peter Pan is the actual worst. But I definitely recommend it's.
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll do like a Peter Pan retelling or adaptation marathon.
Yeah. Just read all of them.
I know. My first recommendation, I'm cheating a little bit. I'm going to combine two books from the same author. But I recommend by Gregory Maguire, these two books. So Confessions of an Ugly Stepsister and Mirror, Mirror. And I guess he's more well known for Wicked. That's probably his most famous book. And of course, I love the musical, but these are two books by him that I liked. Wicked is good, but I didn't continue with the series. I much prefer these. And the reason I like them, I guess they would be adaptations. I don't know. I think they're retellings, but they are put in a real historical time period. So Mirror, Mirror is a Snow White retelling that's set during Italian Renaissance, and the Wicked stepmother is Lucretia Borgia. So she's just this like spoiled, really ostentatious child of the Pope. And she ends up Bianca gets put in her care, quote unquote, and of course runs her out of town. And then when she leaves, she meets the dwarves who end up being mirror makers, and I just love how it just reflects the time period of people making things and inventing things. So that one was really good. And then Confessions of an Ugly Stepsister, I think, is during 17th or 18th century Holland. And it follows obviously Cinderella's stepsisters and their story. And so I just love looking at those classic tales, that classic tale from a different perspective. I read these so long ago, but I mean, if you looked at these copies really closely, you'd see I reread them several times when I first discovered them because I was so taken by them. And they were some of the books that really got me into retellings. So
I want to borrow those from you.
Okay, you can. Kayla, do you have another recommendation?
I do, but it is a children's book, actually. And it is my favorite interpretation of the Cinderella story, and it's called The Rough-Faced Girl by Rafe Martin, I believe. And it is a just gorgeously illustrated children's book about an Algonquin Indigenous American girl. And it's about how there's like this invisible being, or this invisible like god, who comes to their community and is looking for a wife, and all of the like girls in the village are like super hot and they're like, oh, everyone marry me or whatever. And the main character, who's a girl who's like really, really badly scarred on her face and her hands, shows the like invisible being like her interpretation of like the wonders of the natural world, and he chooses her. And it's one of those books where when you're reading it, both like as a child but also as an adult, the like aspect of the Cinderella story that's like strength through kindness and resilience in the face of pain is like very, very much at the forefront of this experience, as opposed to like luck and being chosen for magic and fancy.
Mm-hmm. That sounds good.
Yeah. I'm thinking about some of the Cinderella retellings that I have read, and I feel like the other one I was going to talk about was Stepsister by Jennifer Donnelly. which again looks at the story from the stepsister's perspective. And as I'm hearing us discuss these retellings, you're right, the core of the Cinderella tale is strength through kindness and goodness, and that's what wins at the end of the day. And then I think about this retelling by Jennifer Donnelly, which focuses so much on beauty and outer beauty, and the character of Ella. So in this retelling, it is, I guess, a straight adaptation. In the beginning, they do the story, the stepsisters cut off parts of their feet to try to fit into the glass slipper, which that scene at the beginning of her book I had like a very visceral reaction to it. I was like, oh my gosh, we're doing this. And it was really like, I was engrossed right from the beginning. But then it follows Isabel, who's one of the stepsisters. And she and Ella were really close as children and then grew apart. And Ella is very good and kind and beautiful. And Isabel is obviously very jealous and reacts in a certain way to that. But it also explores how people treat her a certain way because she's quote unquote ugly or doesn't conform to conventional standards of beauty. And there's this great element to Stepsister where there are the characters of the fates. The three fates are drawing the maps of the mortals' lives, and then the god of chance arrives to stir up trouble and try to mess with what the fates have determined. And so they're like bickering amongst each other. So you've got that infallible gods element to it as well. But there's this scene where she goes to, so Chance is posing as this like marquis, and he has this ostentatious house and these like magicians and beautiful courtesans, and she goes to the house and she's taken in by it, and she's talking to some of his friends and saying how she is ugly. That's what people say, and they're like, I've been called worse than that. I've been called loud, obstinate, willful, disobedient, all the things women are not supposed to be. And then this woman says, call a girl beautiful, and that is all she will ever want to be told for the rest of her life. And she'll, and that's a dangerous thing. And it was just like, whoa, it was a very, I think interesting commentary on the original tale. And so I'm thinking about, was the original tale, I think, making maybe a little bit of a moral statement on beauty as being good. I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah.
I feel like that, and also Peter Pan, though, they're also like, women can't be friends, women can't be sisters. There's always going to be a competition, which is, not a great message.
Yeah.
Speaking of Cinderella adaptations, the Disney movie was like of all the Cinderella movies, 7 out of 10.
Yeah.
But there was a line in it that of all of the adaptions, all of the cross-cultural, Chinese, Cinderella adaptions, just all of them, I've never heard anyone say anything like this. And it was the moment where the stepmother, gorgeous Cate Blanchett in a ginormous, beautiful dress, was having like a, angry stepmother rant. And Cinderella was just kind of standing there watching her all sad, because her life's bad. And when the stepmother finally stops ranting, she says something like, what happened to you that made you feel that being this horrible is the only way to survive? And I've never seen an adaptation that directly addresses the stepmother's experience in her own life and the cruelty that they tell you at the beginning. They're like, she's a widower, she's had a hard, whatever, and she's brought that hardness to Cinderella's adorable house and her nice father and whatever. But that's still the only adaptation that I've seen where Cinderella, as a showcasing of her own inner strength and her own emotional maturity, was willing to push past the pain that this person is throwing at her and saying, what happened to you that made this was the only way that you could live and be okay.
Right. Like, what's going on here? Because we always just sort of accept the truth that the stepmother and the stepsisters, they're just evil, right? They're ugly and they're evil. They're ugly on the inside and out. But what the Jennifer Donnelly book does that I liked was showed the truth of the circumstances of the time, which was they needed to find husbands and they weren't going to be able to. And the mother knew that. And so she was literally willing to maim her children in order to get them into a better circumstance. It doesn't make it good or right or anything, but it at least explains it a little bit. And there was another book Rachel and I both read. I think it was All the Other Afters.
Oh yeah, All the Other Afters,
which explores that as well, I think.
Yeah, and how the stepmother, like in that book, she didn't like treat Ella like, you're my servant now. She was a spoiled little girl, and she said, you're going to work in the laundry for a few days to see what it was like for me when I worked in the laundry growing up, so you can appreciate how good you have it. And it was a very interesting take on that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, Rachel, do you have any other recommendations?
I do. I love Madeline Miller's adaptation of the Greek tales. So Song of Achilles is a retelling of the Iliad from Patroclus' perspective. And it's, a lot of it is, I would say, a beautiful love story, but also it just, Patroclus, it's his story of, how he shows his love for Achilles and how he, how he got to the point where he sacrificed himself for his lover, and the way that he, and it also like shows, it was really interesting because they, of course, the army took a lot of the Greek women hostage and enslaved them and forced them into being their wives and everything. And they tried to take, because Achilles was such a good fighter, he got first pick, so he would take as many as he could to just like, because that was what he was expected to do, but because he was not interested in the girls, he just like took them and was like, all right, you all can just like live in my hut together and I won't bother you. So it was kind of, I like that part of it, but it was really just a beautiful story. And then Circe, of course, is a retelling of the Odyssey from Circe's perspective. And it's definitely a good for her book, which we talked about in the last episode. Just she definitely enacts a lot of revenge on not great men. So
I love Circe.
Yeah. So I definitely recommend both of these books, but I think Song of Achilles is my favorite.
I have it. I haven't read it yet.
Me too.
Kelly,
also, that's kind of my thing.
I know. I'm sorry. I stole your line. Kelly, do you have another recommendation?
I do. Okay, so I know I said earlier that like Beauty and the Beast is all my favorite retellings, but I think my actual literal favorite is Cinderella is Dead by Kaylin Barron. And I feel like if you want to do any sort of retelling, just tell me it is this story but feminist. And Cinderella is Dead is, of course, Cinderella but feminist. And it's 200 years after the whole Cinderella thing happened. And the town it's not gotten past it. So now you have all these, every year there's a ball, it's mandatory. And if you aren't chosen, you disappear. And you can be chosen by a guy your own age or like a very old man. The men have all the agency, the women have none, as happens. And the main character is named Sophia. She wants no part of it. She's in love with her friend Aaron, and like that's who she wants to be with. But of course, that doesn't happen because mandatory ball and men pick. But she has a plan, and she's gonna basically burn it all down. And good for her.
Nice.
Oh, I love that. I'll have to read that.
It's so good. It's so good.
Yeah. Kayla, why don't you go first?
My favorite is actually by an author who's made her career doing adaptions, Donna Jo Napoli. She's did Zell, Beast, like I think it was like in the early 2000s or something. She did them all. She's written like 108 books. My favorite part is Sirena, which is like her version of, I think it's her Little Mermaid-ish kind of one, but it's actually about the Trojan War, and it's about, I believe, Philoctetes like washes up on shore on her island where her siren sisters are, and Hera's like, do not help him, do not help him, and she's like, he's hot, I think I'm gonna help him, I think I'm gonna help him. Like, and then it's kind of almost like a reverse Little Mermaid story where like he doesn't know anything about what's going on the island and they don't even speak the same language, and she's like, I will help you, you know, random man. And they slowly fall in love, and it's so beautiful, and it's one of those books that like the writing is kind of like a little bit for younger kids, but the like concepts that she's kind of talking about and the history and the like political ramifications of his situation is very much adult. So I think it's a wonderful book. If anybody is looking for books that are for kids who are really, really bright but have difficulty with like reading comprehension, it would be a really good choice to recommend that.
Oh, that sounds great.
Yeah. I have one more.
Okay.
So Anna K by Jenny Lee, which is her retelling of Anna Karenina. It's sort of like Gossip Girl meets Crazy Rich Asians. Like everybody in this book is crazy rich. And it is so good. I listened to the audiobook, which is narrated by Jenna Ushkowitz from Glee. And it really is very faithful to the original story of Anna Karenina. Anna is a privileged, rich, Manhattan kid, but she actually goes to like private school in Greenwich, Connecticut. So she takes the train back and forth. She loves dogs and horses. And she has this, boyfriend that, he goes to Harvard and he's, perfect to everybody. And then she meets this guy, Vronsky, and falls in love pretty much right away. And she's trying to figure out, why. And her brother, Steven, is just as ridiculous as in regular Anna Karenina. And all the characters are just so great. You're rooting for all of them, except for like a couple of baddies. But it's just like, I don't know. All the kids in this, I'm like, I want to like, keep you and give you a blanket and some hot cocoa and everything's going to be okay. So, yeah.
You had me at Gossip Girl meets Crazy Rich Asians.
Yeah. It's great.
Sounds good. I do want to give a quick shout out to a book that Kayla recommended to us last time you were on the podcast, I think, which was A Blade So Black by L.L. McKinney. It's so good. I read it this year, and it's action-packed as if Alice in Wonderland retelling, but like Alice in Wonderland meets Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And it's funny, it's action-packed, and it follows Alice, who she lives in Atlanta, and she is dealing with the death of a parent. And also she gets recruited by these people from Wonderland to hunt these monsters that are basically, they feed off of nightmares in the real world. And the more nightmares that happen in the real world, which is happening a lot because of all the atrocities against surrounding racial injustice that are happening in our world, they're getting stronger and stronger. So they need more people to fight these monsters. So she gets recruited to be this like slayer of these monsters, and she's really good at it. And then she has friends who like don't understand why she keeps disappearing. And her mom's like, why aren't you home ever now? I'm really worried. Like things are dangerous out there. It's so good. And there's a sequel, which I'm hoping to read soon, but yeah, love that book. Definitely recommend it.
Bookish and the Beast by Ashley Poston. It's the third in her Once Upon a Con series. It's really fun, the whole series, but this one's my favorite of them. And for most of them, it's basically like, oh, here's a normal girl and she meets this famous guy and it's great and sparks fly. And the second one is a lesbian love story, which I love. But this one's interesting because the girl, Rosie, she loves books, of course, and she ends up meeting one of the stars of the franchise, and this is her favorite. It's like her whole childhood. It's great. But the thing with Rosie is she always likes the villain of the story. And the star she meets is, I don't want to say a villain because he's not a bad person. He's just sort of a cranky, mean person. And grouches are my people too, so I absolutely get it. It's just really fun and sweet. And if you've read any book ever, you know exactly how it's going to go. But it's a really fun way to get there. So
Great. Well, these are great recommendations, and I know we're running short on time, so I think we'll wrap it up there. But Kayla, thank you again for joining us. And
yes,
can you remind us where we can find you? People can find you online.
Yes, I am mostly just on Twitter these days. My handle is Kayla Ancrum, just all the way double A's between Kayla and Ancrum. Yeah.
Great. And everyone look out for Darling, which is publishing in June?
June 22nd.
Kelly's like, I have it written down.
I mean, I've had it pre-ordered for a while, and every so often I check because last year and this year pub dates keep moving around, and I keep hoping like maybe it'll be out next month, but no, it's holding steady.
And in the meantime, you can all read Kay's other books that have already been published, The Wicker King and The Weight of the Stars, which are both incredible.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks again for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So that's our show, and the April picks for Book of the Month should be up anytime. You can get your first box for $9.99 with the promo code What You Should Read, all one word.
Yes, and be sure to follow us on social media at WYSR_podcast on Instagram and on Twitter. You can email us at whatyoushouldreadpodcast@gmail.com. Please give us a rating and a review wherever you subscribe to our podcast, and find us on Goodreads.
And now you know what you should read.
You're welcome. Oh my God.
You know what you should read. You know what you should read. You know what you should read.
It's time for What You Should Read, the podcast all about the titles you need. Join 3 book lovers and a guest as they cover all the best new titles to enjoy with your tea.